Hello again. So we're here, the Heretic Sisters, for our third episode. Please like and subscribe if you enjoy this episode. I always forget to say that part. And just a heads up, we're going to be talking about the New Age movement, cults, and gurus this episode. But next episode, we're going to have a guest with us. We're really excited about that, our first guest. So we hope to see you on our next episode. We do these every 2 weeks. But let's start with introductions here, our missions. I'm the hopeful heretic. I'm interested in exploring all of the frequencies with the hope of revealing something higher than our limited minds can grasp. Questions I'm pondering: what is the truth? Can we both have an individual truth and a shared truth? Is it possible to be an individual within a group? What is our individual versus shared responsibilities? Is shared and balanced equity possible?
Hello, everybody. Here is Tatiana, and I'm fearful heretic. I'm all about getting to the bottom of things. And at the same time, I can be superficial because I want to try everything at once. Questions I'm pondering: how do one see reality without distortion? How to embrace all the blooming complexities of life? How to express my experiences in creative work? The question, what's it all for, has not left me since I was a teenager.
Cool. So we're going to talk about religion, spirituality, and cults. But we're really going to focus this episode on the New Age movement. As it happens, we are very influenced by this New Age movement, and it started flourishing in both Europe and the U.S. After many years of being really focused on Christianity and other types of religions. I think we elevated to a higher understanding of how we're united to the universe in general. And I'm just going to read a little bit here about the New Age movement in a general sense and how it got started. As a form of Western esotericism, the New Age drew heavily upon esoteric traditions such as the occultism of the 18th and 19th centuries, including the work of Emanuel Swedenborg and Franz Mesmer, as well as spiritualism, New Thought, and Theosophy. More immediately, it arose from the 20th century influences such as the UFO religions. We'll talk about a UFO cult, and we're talking about leaders, which is interesting, of the 1950s. And UFOs are still very central to our discussion in more of the kind of out there types of people who are interested in New Age stuff. Just recently with the eclipse, we had a lot of talk about UFOs. The counterculture of the 1960s and the human potential movement. The exact origins remain contested, but it became a major movement in the 1970s, at which time it centered largely in the United Kingdom. It expanded widely in the 1980s and 1990s, in particular in the United States. I'm very well aware of that myself. By the start of the 21st century, the term New Age was increasingly rejected within this milieu, with some scholars arguing that the New Age phenomenon had ended. I would say probably not. Despite its eclectic nature, the New Age has several main currents. Theologically, the New Age typically accepts a holistic form of divinity that pervades the universe, including human beings themselves, leading to a strong emphasis on the spiritual authority of the self. This is accompanied by a common belief in a variety of semi-divine, non-human entities such as angels with whom humans can communicate, particularly by channeling through a human intermediary. Lots of channelers. Typically viewing history as divided into spiritual ages, a common New Age belief is in a forgotten age of great technological advancement and spiritual wisdom, declining into periods of increasing violence and spiritual degeneracy, which will now be remedied by the emergence of an age of Aquarius, which we all have been hearing a lot about. And people think that we are in the age of Aquarius. from which the milieu gets its name. There's also a strong focus on healing, particularly using forms of alternative medicine and an emphasis on unifying science with spirituality, which the science community often rejects, although the spiritual community tries to unify it, right?
Just because science is a current religion of our time, and New Age tries to connect somehow to this huge monolith and to be a part of it. Like, we are also science. Look at us. We use physics. We use genetics, like human design does. Yeah, for example.
Yeah. And then the
actual religion of our days is still science.
Exactly. And I think there's like this separation that happens, even though some scientists themselves are sometimes religious people. But a lot of scientists are atheists, and that can be its own religion itself, even though some people would hate to have that defined to them. But yeah, some people are just in the mainstream, religious community and believe that science is just separate from that belief system, which I think is a bummer, because I do believe in kind of a holistic type of life. And even though I tend to agree that governments probably shouldn't be focused on one specific religion, because that would, we have so many, it would be hard to have one that was homogenous. But I do believe in my own life that I'm very much connected to spirituality, but I also have a love of science. And I think that they are not mutually exclusive. There's so many ways to look at them. They're just different ways of looking at the universe, I think.
Yeah. You're absolutely right. And I see it as a big advantage that United States never had a dominating religion that would cover the whole country and would dominate above it, like the picture we see now, for example, in Russia. You have an Orthodox Church had monopolized the religious life in the whole Russia, and now they dictate actually the way the esoteric stuff, all the religious stuff should be perceived. And I think the whole development of New Age movements, I do not see it like the England, the United Kingdom played the main role here. I suppose more United States input influenced the possibility of having so many opportunities of seeing the God or divine or whatever, like this pluralism that came to us, I suppose from United States, not only from not only partially from Europe. Yeah. Do you agree this?
Well, I definitely think that understanding the start of the United States with the settling of the Pilgrims, there was definitely a predominance of a type of religion for a while. However, I think because they were persecuted and left Europe because they didn't think that that one should have a state religion, they did open themselves up to having different, or not monopolizing it, I guess. But for many, many centuries, and still today, there is a dominant Christian kind of belief system, Methodist, I think they say. So, but then also because the U.S. has been so open to immigration, it has, the types of religious denominations have grown as far as the percentage of each. And so in that way, and that's what we're having such a divide right now, because there's some people that think we should be predominantly, back to kind of this Methodist purity type of religious perspective. And so, and we're all fighting regarding that, because there's, obviously there's a lot more different types of belief systems and religions. And some people are actually going away from religious affiliation altogether. So you could say, from the point of view of Russia and your point of view that having one dominant religion is not a great thing, but you could also see in the United States all the battling and that we're doing, and you could say that somebody could say I don't, because somebody could point out, well, that's why they're having so many problems. If they all believed in the same, homogenized way, then they'd have a unified effort and everybody would kind of be going down the same road.
Well, I do not know any country in the history that could demonstrate such a thing. Even in Russia, we have Russia has Buddhism, and also Islamic culture is quite strong, but still Orthodox Church dominates, and the ideology is built on these Orthodox ideas that come from. I don't even want to dig deep into it at the moment, when the pain of the war is so strong.
Yeah.
But actually, so these ideas that one religion could unify us and show us the right way. There is no right way. There is no religion that could unify everybody. It's like
you would just suppress.
It's impossible.
You would basically just suppress those other people. So you would have a dominant, but that doesn't mean that everybody's unified. It just means that the people that are minorities are just suppressed in that culture. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, of course. So it's impossible. It's not practically. Heresy always comes back, strikes back. You know it.
It's evolution, baby, evolution. So do you want to talk about a little bit more, digging a little bit more from your perspective about the New Age movement?
Yeah, so actually what I heard in one of the lecture of Konstantin Mikhailov, he is a scientist who studies religions, and it is a privilege to hear his lectures about all the sorts of New Age movements and traditional religions. And he mentioned actually this New Age magazine, the New Age magazine, which was published in Britain. So here I couldn't say anything about USA because it all started in Britain, the name itself. And he claims that the name of movement comes from the name of this magazine. It started more like socialistic publications and so on. But lately, the art and culture were a big part of their publications, of their issues, and even Bernard Shaw, Herbert Wells, and Chesterton were published there. And even the discussion about Sigmund Freud ideas, it was the first magazine who started to discuss these heretical ideas in England. Yeah, so it shows like it was on the apex of development of cultural thought, let's put it like this. And year by year, somehow the New Age magazine developed a strong line of esoteric publications, especially, for example, so Uspensky was published there, the disciple of Gurdjieff. And lately, this association became strong. Like the New Age is something, is some kind of esoteric stuff that is truly mixed, and where everything is mixed together. So the way it was mixed in the publications of this magazine, that is the story behind the name of the movement.
That's interesting because when I was doing research for this and about the capitalistic movement and how that aligns with Christianity, there was in some conservative perspectives, they think that non-Christian movements and hedonism, like these New Age movements, are very tied to socialism, and they put fear into people, these people going off into they basically believing in a welfare state, putting their trust in humanity rather than a dominant God, and the freedom, I guess, that comes with the capitalistic idea of putting effort into things and doing your individualism, I guess, putting your effort into some things and being, graced by God because you put in the hard work. and effort into instead of relying on the nanny state to provide for you. So it's just, I thought that was interesting.
Yeah. So let's go further. Let's switch to another slide. Yeah. But yeah, so this is, I suppose we would prepare more material in that direction. We already discussed it, connection between the Christianity and the ideology of capitalism, but to a later stage, not today. It is a truly interesting theme. We were ready to talk about it today, but it would be definitely too much for one evening. And just a little bit more about New Age movement. Yeah, from the point of view of poor researchers who are trying to study this difficult topic just because it could drive any researcher crazy, because the structure itself is truly postmodern. Yeah, doctrines are mixed in a way you mix them in a shaker. Yeah, like you can do whatever you like. You can add some science components, you can throw them away, and then you can add some kind of ancient mysticism, and then you add some physics, and then you throw the physics away, and but then comes Christianity in any kind of new additions. So it's almost impossible. It's really difficult to trace the roots of everything, of all the different movements, and the bandbreadth is extremely wide, as we know it. You can start with African religions, or from the religions from Asia, or you can start with Christian base. It's like almost like a cocktail. Yeah. So I'm sorry if somebody is not feeling comfortable about this type of words, about these words. And for example, religions as Buddhism, Hinduism, and Christianity will be replaced by a synthetic spirituality. It looks like that. It goes into that direction, but I suppose a lot of fundamentalists and all the corners of the world wouldn't agree with this point of view. But it looks like that. And this holy idea that the birth of New Age will lead to the birth of a new man. This is also a part of our discourse here. Even human design, you can trace this line. Yeah, this rave story, and also, of course, that the world is ending and the new man is coming at the end of this process of our development of the culture, of civilization, of everything, of this planet. So it is definitely reminds me of human design ideas. Human design is, of course, a part of New Age movement.
Isn't that funny? That it just, the story keeps repeating, and no matter kind of where you land, it's like, with this whole eclipse, there was so many conspiracy theories about from the religious movements, the Christians or whatever, that the world is ending, and there's going to be the rapture to some other. There was a story actually that came out about an astrologer. She was an influencer, and she got so freaked out about this ending of with the eclipse that she stabbed her husband and pushed her baby out of the car. And some people were like, gosh, why do they have to write about astrology? It's like, well, people, there's many different types of people that are interested in these things. So it's not just, you can't just have one person as an example for an entire group. There are people that are mentally unstable, and for some reason, religious movements and fear brings this out in everybody to want to predict the end of times and how eventually we're going to get to this great heaven, when there's this new birth, and we're going to have some kind of new beginning. So it's just interesting that it repeats in different ways. And I also wanted to point out that I wonder, it's almost like the diversification of travel and many different people, being able to travel to different countries and bring it back to their country, how this kind of contributed to this melting pot of different thought systems and different religions.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. This possibility to travel fast, which actually exists last 100 years only for us all. previously it was a privilege of people who had enough wealth to manage it all, and we all traveled before Corona a lot. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now times are changing. Yeah, but let's see how it goes.
Yeah, and there's a lot of fear about that too, because even from a nature perspective, because they're like, oh, if we introduce just these different types of animals, then they overtake the population, or different types of species, they overtake a population. They're not really supposed to be here. But as you evolve, you kind of, the animals evolve, or the species evolve with, with that, and then there becomes diseases and all sorts of things. So there are definitely problems, but also that's kind of how everything evolves into something new. So it's almost like, yeah, I mean, you could try to control all of that, but eventually, nature is going to win out. Right?
Oh, yeah, of
Yeah.
course. Of course, it is.
Do you
There is
want to
no way
move?
to control it.
Let's move on to the next slide.
Yeah, and this is like, as we are both really close to human design way of seeing the life. Yeah, partially or completely, it doesn't matter. I was really happy when preparing another lecture on modern religious movements to find out that at least one doctor of philosophy studies or tries or even mentions human design as a, let's say, Dr. Hustvedt, who works in Methodist University in North Carolina. He writes following about human design. In many senses, could be classified as a trans-religious movement. By the way, we didn't use this word, but sounds really nice. Yeah, trans-religious. It says a lot about the whole New Age concept. Yeah, trans-religious movement. We should be suspicious of trans-religious projects as breathtaking in scope as human design. Comparative inquiry between two traditions is difficult enough. Synthesizing 7 or more traditions without distorting or colonizing the others is an unlikely feat. Writes he in his book, and that's refers clearly to the problem of researchers, on any scholar who tries to understand New Age movement in whole and human design especially. Yeah. So maybe one day we would invite this wonderful philosopher and religious historian to our podcast, but let's see. It would be truly interesting, really interesting to talk and discuss not only human design, but the whole New Age situation with a person with such qualification.
Yeah, that's an interesting point of view. The synthesizing of different, I think I have this argument with purists and all sorts of things. I mean, there's human design purists, even though it's a synthesis of so many different. It's a synthesis itself of so many different types of different, like you said, different traditions, and so they want it to be the only tradition, which makes no sense to me. I definitely think there's something to be said for being well versed in a tradition itself, so that you can have your own understanding of the development and how they came to synthesize. That's why I think for me, astrology, I continue to study astrology, even though some human design people are like, well, astrology is baked in and beyond. I mean, astrology is baked into human design and even beyond that. So why would you bother with astrology? That's a 7-centered, type of system. And to me, I'm just like, well, this is where there's so much history. And I want to really understand all of that history. And as a 5/1, it's endless study, which is so interesting to me. I want to just study all of it. And then I probably would want to go and study more of the I Ching and I have studied the Kabbalah, but I haven't studied it extensively. But I think there's something to be said for both approaches, like not skimming over the real depth of each of these traditions, but at the same time, there's some wonderful things with synthesizing all of them. You can come into some new ideas and new breakthroughs of things you hadn't, which I've seen in human design, studying human design, really being able to see the chart so quickly. And being able to synthesize something so quickly, just now that I know the chart a little bit more. I've always looked at the human design chart if I needed to understand something very quickly from a personality or a perspective. So I think it's an interesting topic. Yeah.
3 minutes and you can already navigate. If you do not have time, or just briefly, 2 minutes, 1 minute, like the first look, and you already see the pattern, the main stuff, and so on. Yes,
yeah,
amazing.
Yeah, I mean, so when we've talked about these, when we look at these charts, I did look at the astrology, but for me, it was like, oh, it's quicker to see the patterns in human design. So I stuck with that, even though I made some notes, and the patterns were just so much easier to see. So yeah, so that's interesting. I would love to talk to him more.
Yeah, so and maybe even the other one, the Russian speaking specialist. So let's see. I hope our communication here would develop and go far and beyond. And of course, it would be interesting to talk with the persons of such a level, with such an education and scientific approach about the things that are actually not that scientific at all. And that's what he writes here, like synthesizing, but actually it is not synthesized. That's the magic in human design, for example. So you need to add some sparkle of miracle for the system start functioning. When you approach it as a scientist, like I'm mixing a lot of astrology, I'm adding Kabbalah, I'm adding that. Of course, it doesn't work like that. So that's the mystery behind human design. And why does it work? How can we understand the person in general? Of course, really fast in seconds and minutes, and it's a magic. And it is really difficult to understand it from a scientific point of view, but that it makes everything even more interesting.
Yeah, and I almost feel like and the reason why I have broadened out my perspective and I'm not a purist is that fundamentally all of these religions that have the same, they're just different. When I look at astrology and people talk about house systems, I'm like, it's just a different window into the same thing. The essence is there, and so it's just a different way of looking at this essence that each one brings to the table, because there's so many commonalities of them, and the centerpiece is very similar. To me, the good parts of them are very similar, and so the ways that you, depending on your culture, depending on what you focus on from a cultural perspective, you might be more inclined to believe in one versus the other. But to me, I see the essence of all of them. So it doesn't make sense to me for people to fight about something that in the essence of that teaching is very similar. So let's look at the similarities and let's come to a common understanding of what that means. And then you can have your perspective and a window into that, and I can have my own perspective where we can kind of mix those perspectives and come up with something new, right?
Yeah, and I totally understand your love of astrology, just because I'm also, I couldn't say that like human design is my holy grail and I do not look left or right. No, I'm also delighted to listen to good astrological prognosis or whatever. Yeah, and I'm interested in tarot. There are so many, and all the disciplines that are mixed inside human design separately. Yeah, but astrology is still important. I'm sure, absolutely. It's just
Yeah,
another.
I can't remember. Is your view possibilities too?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. Yeah. So some people think that, because in human design, we have different perspective views of how we see the world. And so when, people ask me, oh, what is your view? Because there's certain perspectives that are more inclined to be, there's a little bit like the personal perspective, and they're more inclined to see something in a very specific way versus possibilities. We're a little bit more open to viewing, all of the different, that's how we see. So we like to see all of the different types of possibilities that there are, because that kind of, you just don't know what's going to stick out to you or not. And there's always going to be something special that's not always, I guess, regimented or rigid in that view. What is your take on that, Tatiana?
Yeah, of course. So like we see so many, I see, you see, I hope we are on the right page here. Yet so many roads towards the same direction. Yeah. And
Yeah.
why should you be limited? Even when I hear the words that about the human design, that there is a classical human design and rest is heresy, and remembering what a person Ra was, and even he was like really strict on human design development. Sorry, people, it's a bit strange. I cannot put myself into this kind of unified form. I
In a
need more
box.
space. In a
Need
box,
more
yeah.
space. And then
Yeah.
when you talk about transreligious, it's very interesting because even in the human design community, or even broader than that, people are talking about transhumanism and how that brings so much fear to people, combining machines with or having transgender people, messing with what God has produced, by creating these surgeries, and but what's interesting about that, they're so against it, but we already have machine parts like with pacemakers, and people already do surgeries, to keep them alive, so it's and plastic surgeries for medical necessities, but still for some reason people get really freaked out on this notion of being trans and thinking about it in a trans way, right? A combination.
Yeah, yeah, of course. But that's it. We are always our revolution, our internal revolution never sleeps. Yeah, we are always ready to go towards something new, to develop something new. Yeah, I
Yeah,
have
that's human
problem.
nature, for sure.
Yeah, but ours especially. Yeah, there are a lot of. Yeah, I'm sometimes jealous when I meet people who are really content with everything as it is and how the life was before or whatever. Like I physically cannot live in that way.
Yeah,
Mm.
it would be interesting to think about it because there's been a lot of discussion in the United States about that, because people think that there are those in conservative thinkers who really want to go back in time to this like
Oh yeah, good luck
ideal
with that.
world, yeah, and stop
Good luck,
the
people.
momentum, and with the US like creating draconian abortion laws, because frankly our population is declining, and so I think that's one of the driving forces around it, even though they will say it's something else. It feels like people want to hold us back, and then there are other that are racing on to the future, and so there's a tension, and obviously we're going to go toward the future, but in a way you need kind of both to kind of balance each other out, the people that hold people back, and the others are like, no, there's no way you can hold people back, you have to move forward. But that the tension that you create, even though it's sometimes miserable, is necessary to balance and
Yeah,
to create the
yeah,
evolutionary, kind of mutation.
yeah. Totally agree. Just because I know truly well how unlimited my revolutionary intentions could be, and I brought enough harm into my life, my own personal life. doing the things that usually like the people say like, why? Just because I wanted to go forward and that's it. Yeah, it is sometimes it is truly helpful to have someone who's like trying to stop you or
And
balance you. In best case scenario, just balance you. Yeah.
well, I think that's the special thing about the 5-1 is because the one part of our body is very much needs that security and that, conservative, in certain ways, that conservative point of view of security versus the 5 who's the heretic. So that's why they always say you have to deliver something practical, because even though you're oriented toward the future, you've got the one line that's really like wants to stay and has like wants to hold you back. And so for the future, maybe this is evolution and the mutation itself, is that we can't just rush ahead unless it's a practical kind of evolution, or we would basically, it's like comparing Saturn and Jupiter, that growth and expansion when you're not ready for it. And then, you basically become manic and mentally unstable because you're just not prepared for it, that kind of mutation.
You're not built for
Saturn,
it.
Yeah, Saturn kind of holds you back. So Saturnian people versus Jupiter people. Yeah, you've just like awakened something in me. It's like, I should study all of this a little bit more about like the types of people, I guess, and how they're oriented. But from a perspective of 5-1s, maybe the 3-5s are a little bit more like, let's just do it, let's just move forward. I would be interested because I definitely know that there's conservative 3-5s. So
and your son is 3-5 also, no?
No, he's a 1-3.
He's a 1-3 because I have 2 3-5s. My kids. I would have a lot of material later. For the moment when they are still they're too small, but I'm doing already my observations. Yeah, so most like they look more stable and practical than me, or as I feel it, as I perceive it. They are like, and they do not have splits. Also, both of them. They're lucky enough. Yeah.
So they seem stable. That's interesting. That's an interesting study of yourself versus your kids. But I'd love to talk about that more. So we wanted to continue our conversation, and like the New Age conversation, we could go on and on about. There's so many things to explore, just religion altogether, but we didn't want to pack too much. But we wanted to talk about, because I'm oriented in people. I'm a projector, probably more than Tatiana. It's like I started to research these things, and I was like, I wonder what this person's human design is. I wonder what, and so I got really more inclined to want to look at people in these different ways. And we wanted to talk about, we wanted to extend the conversation around this idea of what makes, somebody dangerous versus what makes somebody, what's the difference between this enlightened guru that everybody follows and has, and who kind of influences the world versus somebody who's more destructive, like a cult leader. And, we had that same discussion around, what makes a 5-1, like a spiritual, like Joan of Arc, versus somebody who's really very troubled and crazy. And so I thought it would be, I started to study the different influences, and we'll go into kind of the gurus right now, which kind of started around this New Age movement. And I think they wouldn't have been able to be as successful in the West, these Eastern gurus that came to the West, they're both Indian, if it weren't for the New Age movement and people's openness to these different ways of this different spiritualities and different avenues into spirituality. And I wanted to talk about, let me just move into my notes on this other slide. But I started to talk about from the very beginning, the gurus, the Indian gurus that started with basically Yogananda was a person, he's a manifester, splenic manifester, which makes so much sense. He's kind of the first Indian guru that kind of made a big splash in America. And so many astrologers were influenced by him, and just spiritual leaders were influenced by him. And so I thought it was interesting that he was a manifester. And then so I'm only presenting two of these Indian gurus, but I did look at a wide variety of them, the ones that became very popular. And it was very interesting because there were a lot of them. There were some anomalies. And I'm not saying this is statistical because I still only looked at around 10 of these Eastern gurus, but they were all 1-3s, which was interesting. And all of even the cult people, most of the gurus and the cult leaders had an undefined chi, which I thought was also very interesting, because from an undefined chi means that they are, adapting to many different, identities
and scenarios.
Yeah, so they're able to adapt, and they're able to appeal to many different types of people, and they're always looking, they're looking for love and direction. And so they kind of made their own way into finding that love and direction, and attracted so many people to them in that way. And I thought it was also very interesting that a lot of the Eastern gurus that were more oriented toward, the Eastern gurus would have a person that they followed, a spiritual master that they followed for many, many years. So it was like a mentorship. So they didn't go and just become like this leader and, to develop this movement. They followed different in India anyway. They followed other different gurus, and they became kind of an apprentice to that guru. Yogananda himself was from a lineage. They were both, this Yogananda and Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, which was the leader of the Transcendental Meditation movement. They were both born 24 years apart, but they both had the same exact rising sign, which I thought was so interesting. And they had Jupiter and Aries in the 8th house, and Venus in Sag in the 4th house. So there was this exploration and pioneering that they both did to bring, a new movement to the US. And they both had completely open solar plexus. And Ra himself said, it was funny that all of these gurus had an, either undefined or open solar plexus, because it was like, we want to feel bliss, we want to get to that state of bliss, because, a lot
not
of
knowing
people,
what to feel. Yeah.
And so people were open solar plexus don't want to have all of the moodiness of the defined solar plexus. They want to feel happy. They want to feel blissful. They don't want to have the waves that they sometimes get from the defined solar plexus that they amplify. So I thought it was funny that not funny, but confirming that these both had under or open solar plexus. But also I thought it was interesting that so Maharishi Mahesh Yogi is leader of the Transcendental Meditation movement. He was called the Giggling Guru, and he was the guru to the Beatles. And what I thought was so interesting about him is that Ra always talks about this, and I got a little bit like, no, this is not true for me, which is left brains should not meditate because they have an active brain and it's damaging to their brain. And what I didn't think he really understood about transcendental meditation, which is the form that I actually took to. Prior to that, I couldn't do the other types of meditation, is a chant. So you're keeping your mind active on focusing on a word, and that leads you into this meditation. So it's not like you're kind of zoning out, although now I can zone out. I just watch my thoughts. It's more of a watching of my thoughts kind of movement. But I thought it was interesting that he had a left brain and a right mind, which is exactly what I have. And I really find a lot of benefit from transcendental type of meditation.
Yeah. That's nice because I, for the moment, I do not even try to dig deeper into meditation because it never worked out for me. But your yoga works perfectly. Yeah, so body movement and this stuff is ideal for me. But we are a bit different in this. So I'm like uh, more on the Ra's side. But Ra was always trying to generalize immediately with 5, 10 charts, and then he sees the trend.
Yeah.
The rule of small numbers. I check 10, 20 charts and I know how they are all built. But it's okay. We are all like that. We are all built like that.
Yeah. Oh, exactly. And then you have a left mind. So in a way, maybe the combination of left right kind of leads you into being able to, zone out in meditation. I find relief in it. I find relief in letting my mind kind of wander, but maybe that's the difference between right mind and left mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, maybe. So, as always, we have to experiment with ourselves here and find our own ways. But it's nice that there are some patterns definitely in these gurus, yeah, and all this. And how privileged were you all that you had this transmission at the time when they came to United States, to Europe, because Soviet Union was really secluded and ausgeschlossen. Sorry, German word comes. So we didn't have a luck to receive these old teachings during the times when it was freely accessible in the West.
Yeah, I mean they really influence a lot of people. And Yogananda has a very popular book called Autobiography of a Yogi, which I started but haven't finished, like most
It's quite
things.
normal.
So yeah, and I also just wanted to point out that Yogananda had a Pluto-Neptune conjunction at the exact degree in gate 16 in the 10th house, and that's 8 degrees in Gemini. So if people are following astrology, he's just very much oriented toward this spiritual breakthroughs that he had, and that he led and mentored other people to. But I also thought it was interesting, the 1-3s, because it seems like 1-3s. Can you speak to that at all? Like why that profile is so prevalent in kind of that Eastern orientation of spirituality or different movements? Would you have any thoughts on that?
Oh, actually, I have no thoughts on that, but I have a husband who is 1-3. And
Mental.
sometimes
They're
I
very
feel,
mental, right?
yeah, so they're very mental and more stable, definitely, because this one is here in the front. In the front, I do not have the exact idea, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, my son is a 1-3,
Yeah,
and so
what is your observation?
there is it depends. I think the chart is he's got the 35-36, so he likes to dabble in a lot of different things, but there's some kind of when you talk about the cross of penetration, which was what Yogananda was, born on the cross of penetration, and then also Ram Dass was also on the 1-3 on the cross of penetration. So it's almost like there's this need to understand how the mind works and how to master, I guess, the mind, maybe. And there's so I guess from that one perspective, when you're looking at the foundation and trying to dig into the mental space of that 1-3. I mean, that's something that I would love to talk to other 1-3s about. Like, I have noticed a commonality of 1-3s that really just are very much more focused on the mental and wanting to understand the mind. But I'm not sure if that's something.
Yeah, maybe. But cross of penetration and manifestor at the same time. So he was preparing, sowing preparing the soil for the seeds that would come later.
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah,
this superficial penetration that is actually deep enough to establish the future movements in this direction. Yeah, so it's like I see the magic here, but 1-3, yeah, like, I have to think it over.
yeah.
Uh,
Interesting.
and yeah, to be honest, yeah, well, to be well prepared is extremely important for 1-3, definitely. Yeah,
Yeah,
they
so
are
there's a
really slow.
preparation, yeah,
Yeah.
and so the following the gurus and the lines of gurus and the
Mhm,
traditions seem very appropriate to 1-3s.
mhm,
Maharishi was born on the crust of the Maya, and they were both, they
mhm,
were both Capricorns,
mhm.
and
Surprise!
surprise, but in different. But both had the same 0-1 Virgo rising, which I thought was interesting. The only person that I found that wasn't a 1-3 that was sort of from the, from that Eastern tradition, although he was kind of a heretic himself, was Osho. He was a 2-4.
Mhm,
Which when we'll go on to the cult leaders. A lot of cult leaders have 4 in their profile, 2-4s
mhm,
specifically, but there's a mix. In the US, especially, I just looked at the US for myself from very specific cult leaders. I found a lot of either 2-4, these are 2-4s.
mhm,
I found a commonality of 2-4s, but also 4-6s. And there was David Koresh was a 6-2. So they're not all, 4 lines, but he had his nodes
mhm,
on a 4 line. But these two people, I'll just talk about them very briefly, who they were, so that the audience can understand. Charles Manson, you're probably familiar with. He
mhm,
had this cult following of a bunch of women. He was actually from a criminal background, and his mom was also a criminal, and he grew up in a way that was not stable. And
mhm,
what was very interesting about Charles Manson and these other cult leaders, but they had a Pluto in some form in their fourth house. And Pluto in your fourth house means that you've had a really rough upbringing. Usually, there's
mhm,
something about your upbringing that hasn't been stable, that has put you through a tremendous transformation. So Charles Manson was had some mental problems. I think all can agree. I mean, most of these people have, but he
mhm,
was a criminal and was in jail prior to him forming this cult with a lot of women, very charismatically, with a lot of women, and in San Francisco. And he started to become friendly with some celebrities, and he was known for his a few of his followers for murdering a celebrity woman who was
mhm,
Sharon Tate, who was I think 9 or 8 months pregnant at the time. I can't remember her month, but
in
and
the late stages, definitely.
yeah. So, and they were put into jail. The 2 women and him were put in jail, and were not released. It was a big sensation. And then Marshall Applewhite was he was a 2-4 as well. He was what we would call when I said there were some people who believed in that we came from UFOs, he was one of them. So he was a 2-4 cross of contagion. His cult was called Heaven's Gate Cult. And I wanted to read a little bit about him because it's so fascinating. He led 39 members of Heaven's Gate to their death by suicide. The bodies were found in a mansion near San Diego, and their macabre ritual had been carried out over prior 3 days, where they took phenobarbital
Orbital.
in
Mhm,
applesauce and vodka. They were wearing new Nike shoes, had pockets full of quarters for a video arcade in paradise, they questioned,
no.
and were draped in purple cloths. And Applewhite was the son of a Presbyterian minister born with good looks and a nice singing voice. Married with 2 kids, he left both his wife and the University of Alabama after a gay affair and took a job teaching music in the late 60s at a University of St. Thomas, Houston, Texas. But his divorce after 16 years of marriage was a painful experience. And so he was depressed about it. And he had a lot of sex demons, so he checked himself into a hospital asking to be cured of his homosexual desires when he met Bonnie Lou Truesdale Nettles when he was in that hospital. And in debt without his former social connections, with his career as a professional in doubt, he had found himself He's found himself in a spiritual wasteland. But everything came together for them both. They felt so connected as soulmates and beings from another dimension that they even gave themselves names that were connected, such as Bo and Peep, Guinea and Pig, Doe and Tea. Their relationship was chaste, but their minds were complementary and their passions the same. They wanted to escape mankind's eternal predicament, to get out of life alive. They formed their own theology out of the clay of scripture and the occult, from the Bible and the stars, from seances and brimstones. And what's interesting about their partnership was that they formed the G because she had the 25 and he had the 51. Mm-hmm. And she also had the 45 to his 21, which were his nodes. Mm-hmm. And it was interesting. I found a few patterns of people with 21, 45 nodes for cult leaders. Jim Jones also had 21, 45. And David Koresh was another cult leader, and he had a flipped design nodes that the South node was in 21. So I thought that was interesting because the 21 the 2148, sorry. 21 is about control. And then Jim Jones, who also led the people that followed him to suicide as well, he also had the 5342, which is that follow through. You've got to have that follow through. And we're going to go to the death, and all of my followers were going to commit suicide together. And they had the same nodes, which is so interesting to me. And again, they had undefined G's. They both had undefined spleens. Now, I didn't look at this pattern on more of them, but it's about, fear and, controlling that fear. They both had undefined egos, and they both had a tribal 1949, which also, David Koresh also had the 1949, which also was interesting. And Jim Jones only had the 49. So I thought that was fascinating because that's, it's all about tribal control and so they both had different, we could talk about the astrological similarities, but I think we'll do that in a different time. But it was just a fascinating study to see, what creates a cult, versus a cult leader versus somebody that is, more around like on a more of an accepted guru or a religious person that has a lot of followers, but they're not as destructive. And so I think that it really just depends on, it depends on a lot of things. There's a lot of these patterns that I see. Again, they're not statistically significant, but also just because you have an undefined G doesn't mean you're going to be a cult leader. I just think that it's interesting to talk about. And then even like a Pluto in the 4th house, which a lot of them did have troubled childhoods, and those tribal connections doesn't mean that all are going to be destructive like that. It's just an interesting when you look at the patterns that show up for somebody who's going to come in and have these cults. They've come from a troubled background, like the marshal who is gay and was trying to he felt really guilty about being gay and had to suppress that, and versus Charles Manson, who came from a very unstable criminal background, who didn't have stability in his home, and how that kind of proliferates these kinds of these kinds of actions.
Yeah. And this, I'm really interested in this 1949 team and tribal stuff here. I suppose it played a huge role in all the situations, and it attracted people to them that strong. Yeah,
Yeah.
my son has only this channel actually. Yeah, fine.
Interesting.
Yeah, so I'm like expecting some interesting stuff coming out of it, but let's see.
Yeah,
Mm.
I've as a 49, like we both have 40. I mean, those were our son, and so we have very defined principles. I know that both of us have very defined principles of what we consider, um, right for us, and maybe for,
Mhm.
we have the judgment channel, so we definitely have
Yeah,
judgments
yeah,
about what's right and what's wrong. But
judgment.
I
Mhm.
frequently do think that, so sometimes when I see something and I'm just like, that's not right, I definitely have a reaction to that and can,
Mhm.
cut people out of my life. But with the 1949, I have had connections that have that whole channel were compromised there. So, and so that's that channel combination. Can you describe what you
You
see from
mean
your son? Like what's the difference between just having the 49 versus the 1949?
so we have to keep in mind that he has no splits and he's like more generally more stable than me, but this thing with principles is even stronger,
Okay.
definitely, with such an openness. He definitely knows what is right for him and what is not, and he definitely looks for his tribe. Now at the life stage when everything changes for him, and also 3-5, yeah, I see like he changed totally the tribe. So he
Mm,
belongs now to another tribe, and the friends of his childhood who were with him for many years are now left behind. I don't know if he would ever come back to these connections, but he changes. So when he changes his tribe completely. Yeah, I don't
mm,
know how it would develop further in his life, but that's what I notice. It is extremely important for him to be surrounded by the right people. It is, it is not like he proclaims it, he tells it. No, it happens simply, automatically. Like
I
that's it.
see.
That's how I understood that he definitely has changed. Like
Mm,
completely new set of people and completely new tribe. But
mm,
when you have only this channel, the whole channel defined, and our principle, yeah, and I would say it feels more balanced if you compare it with me, with our 49. But you are so suddenly while you were talking, I understood why I left one of my jobs here. Like everything there was organized completely in conflict with my principles. So it was everything done the way I could not accept. Because
yeah.
later I said, like, why didn't you stay there? There was a lot of privileges. I could work the 2 days and then I have a day off and then 2 days more. So like I have a pause in the middle of the week. And my boss was extremely kind and happy that I was sitting there and I was one of the best. Okay, the salary was not that high, but still, yeah, it could have lasted for years. I could study human design or whatever in parallel. But the whole process was built totally in contradiction with the way I understand the work ethics and everything. And I left. That was
Mm,
actually that is the main reason. All other was other things were totally not important. Yeah. Now looking back, like maybe it was strategically more wise to stay there. Yeah, because
yeah.
I was allowed to do anything I want. Yeah, I was a kind
Mm,
of small star. Yeah, like oh Tanya, 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 do what you want. Do you want a vacation? Okay, come. You want today the day off? Please have it. No, but they are walking in the way that I couldn't accept. So a bit less balanced, maybe. My kid demonstrates a bit more balanced approach, like more natural flow of energy. Let's see.
how long
But mhm,
how long did it take you to make that cut? That
with the
decide.
job, you mean?
Yeah, yeah.
I suppose we have to investigate it for us both because previously, many years before, I heard it from a good astrologer that I have this 2 year cycle
Mm-hmm.
of love, and actually it took me 2 years. to get out of this job. I
Mm,
started really early to search for another place, but actually, so these phases of 2 years, and the next job also 2 years and 3 months is, and so I show, I see the some kind of pattern here also. But
interesting.
in your case, how many years do you need to?
Well, I notice sometimes it takes me a little while to get to where you're getting, like, because I'll rationalize it with all the pros and cons a lot of the times before I came into human design, and simply I mean, sometimes it's like cut if they're really bad, and I think I'm going through that in marketing in general, because the principles have gone so far afield of what I want to do. It's been a process, because for a little while I was doing consulting work, and I was like, okay, I can do whatever they want me to do.
Mhm.
And I can compartmentalize. But it became harder and harder for me to do that as it became more commonplace for marketers to be expected to do certain things. And it got worse and worse and worse until now it's like I can't even motivate myself to apply for certain jobs, even though I don't have any like consulting work right now. I was able to keep the consulting work when I had somebody inviting me and knew that I could do anything, and kind of, knew that my skills, I can do anything. But it was about the principles of the ways that people are marketing that just really, I just can't do anymore. So, but I definitely noticed those cycles, and that's why it's been very helpful for me to be in consulting, because I don't have to stay in a position for very long. In consulting, it's been a little bit over a year. Sometimes in my work, it was basically that 2 years,
Mhm.
pretty much tops. Sometimes I had to leave before that, like a year or whatever, and then that became just too much for me, because starting something new completely every 2 years is really hard.
Yeah, it's a bit difficult. I do understand. I get
So,
you.
but yeah, but being a consultant is great, because you can kind of slide in and fix a problem or put up some systems, and then you can back off and go into something new. But I think there's a limit to, building the foundation. You have to have that foundation built, or it's like building a whole new foundation again over 2 years. That's hard.
Mm. Yeah, that's hard. Oh, it's so nice to meet a person who understands you so deeply. I'm happy.
Tell me what the principles were. Can you share a little bit about what the principles were that you couldn't
Uh,
do?
so just I suppose at that time I didn't meet human design yet, or started. So it was the very early stages. Corona came and all, and human design came to me. But ineffective usage of energy of people, completely stupid and ineffective, not effective organization of working processes, and this constant attempt to pass the responsibility to other person. That was
Mm,
almost a corporate culture.
mm,
And even though I still communicate in touch with the colleagues there, and they are sitting on their places and are unhappy, but they do not see another see the ways out. For me, it was almost unbearable. I had to press myself to get back to work, even though I was always praised. Tanya, you did so well. You make your job so good. I was considered a workaholic in that
mm.
company, even though I worked only 24 hours a week and with a day off on Wednesday. But just because I was trying to do something,
Move
to do
something
some
forward.
yeah, to do something in a way like to invest not that much energy but be effective and to help people because it was a customer service. uh,
Uh,
why
yeah.
do you care so much about our customers? Yes,
Oh
of
God,
course, why? So it
that's
was,
so
I
interesting.
definitely felt really difficult. It was not my place, even though
Did you
some
did you try
other
to be a heretic about it? Did you try to do something
I
heretical?
tried one. So in the beginning I tried. My main heresy was an attempt to improve the quality of coffee we received from the company. Yeah, because coffee was the shittiest one in my life, and I'm a coffee addict. But not only me, a lot of people there. And I was trying to create a revolution regarding this. So it is impossible. Nobody should drink the coffee like this.
That's
It led
hilarious.
to the change of supplier, and next
Uh-huh.
coffee was even worse.
Ah!
After that, I started my search.
Oh
The
my God, they're
quality of
gonna burn you at the
coffee tells you
stake.
everything.
They're gonna burn you at the stake. That's funny because we just had this conversation about the U.S. and I think a lot of times people in the U.S. are I mean, you still have big companies like that too who have a very entrenched culture, but in the startup world, it was like go 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 go, and everybody would compete against each other about how productive they could be. And in that way, I definitely loved startups because I don't like to sit around and complain about things. I want to like fix things. I want to move forward. I want to make an impact. And so that's an interesting thing to think about. But at the same time, you get really, oh gosh, so tired to always have to move forward and always be productive too. So there's yeah. Could I live in one environment versus the other? I probably not. If somebody's digging their heels and they can't move forward and passing the buck. No, I couldn't do that.
But you're not a fixer. Yeah, I'm not a fixer. We just
I'm
have
not
to throw in our ideas
yeah.
and go away. That's actually the way it should be. But
Yes.
yeah, in ideal life.
Yes.
People, please accept our brilliant ideas. We suffered
You
so
implement
much.
them.
Yeah, you implement them. We suffered so much to acquire this knowledge, and we are ready to share.
It's funny. I became a very good implementer, but I think I just, from the non-self maybe had to. Okay. So I just wanted to talk before I hand it off to you to talk. I wanted to bring up these two because they were right now they have they're documentaries on HBO, and that prompted me to want to look into their charts to see who they were and to understand if the patterns were repeating. And this first person is. Let me just get his name really quick. Charles Dedrick. I don't know if I pronounced his name, but he had his cult was called Synanon, and it was an alcohol and drug abuse program, and created this huge cult around him. And he was born on the 4-6 cross vessel of love, and he was an alcoholic, and he basically was like, I need something for myself, and then just drew all these people. And at first it was really great, and they had this very destructive way of dealing, like he's got an open solar plexus, but confronting everybody in this room. They did this very confrontational type of examination. It was his groups practiced tough love basically, and they had long encounters that included caustic and profane abuse, reviling and humiliating substance abusers as worthless losers. So they would just come together and have a cathartic moment, I think, over, just really confronting each other's failures and why they were alcoholics. And so it became, he actually created this whole industry and made a lot of money actually from all of his followers. And then it went overboard. He's a mental projector. And then this other person, I don't know her birth time, but she was a young person who she called herself Mother God, and her name was Amy Carlson, and she was a 3-5, which is an anomaly in these groups. I think so. She could have been a 2-4, but the way that they talked, she's a projector. In my mind, she's a projector, because the way that they talked about her was that in her life story, she had 3 children by 3 different men, and then she left her children. So that to me is more of a 3-5 behavior than a 2-4. But they described her as more and more followers came to her, she became worse and worse because she couldn't handle the energy of all of those people. And for me, that really demonstrates the projectorness. And so she could have been a 15-5 generator, but I was like, no, that doesn't make sense. And so I put her on as this time of birth. And she basically was an alcoholic too. And she had this belief that colloidal silver,
yeah.
was going to cure her, and she ended up turning blue and destroyed her liver and died very young. She was born in the same year as us in November. She was a Sagittarius, and she died very young. But she also had a tribal, the channel of community here, and the channel of talent. And so they were both projectors, and they had, she has a completely open root. And he has a lot of connections to his root, and an undefined spleen, which is probably where he's maybe gets his, that fear. He basically had to control everybody. He has that 21, the gate 21. She also had the 21, but he basically, when he quit smoking, everybody in his cult had to quit smoking. So he was very controlling in that way, and he's a mental projector, and he started drinking again. After some time of having his troubles, and ended up dying of a cardiac arrest, but he was drunk when he got arrested. So I thought that was interesting. And then what I noticed about some of these cult leaders was they had the Libra Aries, like I said, the Libra Aries North Node, South Node, which is a Libra and Aries are about, being independent versus having relationships. So we're in the nodal, right now we're in the South, Libra Aries South Node, North Node. And so it becomes this tug of war of, war and fighting over your beliefs and fighting to have your own individual autonomy versus being more attuned to relationships.
Part of something, yeah.
Yeah, so that balance, and so then all of these other cult leaders too have very prominent Uranus themes of being different and wanting to and needing to create a community. Most of them were tribal. He wasn't tribal; he was a mental projector, but most of them were tribal in some way. Those cult leaders had developed tribes around them, and for her, she had the fourth line on her node. So I think what happened is she would form these relationships with men, and sometimes the men would kind of be the people that would attract the other people. She had one specifically that I think was probably the 2-4 or whatever that would attract the people into her life. So yeah, let's move on. I'm monopolizing this a little bit.
No, it's okay. It's like really interesting investigation. Don't be scared from looking at this photo. This is I'd like to talk a little bit about the things that I saw when I was 17, 18, 19 in Russia, like after the fall of the wall, after the Soviet Union was gone, or in the process of it. A lot of cults appeared on this territory, former Soviet Union territory. And it was all of a sudden, within 1 or 2 or 3 years, it all came to us. The things that you had for years, for decades, the development of all this stuff, everything came at once. And it was like, we had so many monsters in our energetic field, let's put it like this. And one of this White Brotherhood was really extremely famous, and it was famous even 10 years later in the beginning of 2000, because a friend of mine, she was involved partially in it for luckily briefly, and she said, yeah, I was with them. I was trying to find out if they are good enough and interesting, and it was interesting, but then I understood that this is not my thing. and she left. Luckily, I'm really happy for her. But this idea, by the way, the lady Maria Devi Christos, that's how she called herself. So the story behind it is like she was born, by the way, in Donetsk. Yeah, Donetsk at that time was had the name Stalino. I didn't even knew that the city was named after Stalin for years. So she was born in Stalino, but after that, the city get back the name Donetsk, and this is the very city where all the tragedy goes for the moment. All this situation started with Russian-Ukrainian war. So she was living some kind of life there, and suddenly during there are different information, there is different information regarding this, but during her 5th or 10th abortion she had a clinical death and was dead, like almost dead for 3.5 hours, and that changed her completely, and she woke up like an embodiment of Jesus Christ, but this time a mother, a cosmic mother of all beings. And late in 1 month she met the second person. On next slide we would check his chart, and they started this cult together, and it was extremely popular during beginning of 90s, and they were predicting this end of the world for November 1993. And I do remember this was my first year, okay, second year at the university, and second year in St. Petersburg. I was 17, 18, 19 during this period, and St. Petersburg was looking really terrible. You cannot compare it with St. Petersburg we visited during my childhood. Everything was dark. A lot of buildings were abandoned. So you can see the fall of Soviet Union. It was a nice illustration. Yeah, but a lot of posters with this face exactly. So she was everywhere, and we were cosplaying her in our in our university. It was like a joke of a day every day. Yeah, she was.
She looks like a child in this picture.
Yeah, she's quite young, and yeah, a little bit like a child. And by the way, she has this 59.5 femme fatale as her nature in Pluto. I suppose a lot of attraction this chart, by the way, I should have placed the sign that this, I do not know exact birth data. That's how I see in accordance with the events that happened in her life. I chose that time, but I suppose 59.5 stays anyway on all the charts of this day. And that's, I suppose, a huge part of her attraction. Yeah, to a huge part of the way she attracted people. Yeah.
And she's got the 636 nodes, which makes sense as far as like her crises of pregnancies. You know, that 36 is transformative gate to have your nodes in, and a lot of crises I think that you see around.
Yeah, and I choose a triple split chart just because, like, I like triple splits, you can imagine. But this right angle cross of service, by the way. So I know this one. The person who taught me human design, she has a cross of service. So I see from this chart, as I see it, it looks like the intention somewhere deep inside, the energy somewhere deep inside were good, if we could say it like this. So if we would abstract from channel of judgment, but channel of mating, for example, and channel of surrender, she was a really, really good transmitter. You're very tribal and really attractive in all the ways you can imagine. Yeah, and the same time, the channel of logic, the same we have, and the head that was separated from the rest of your body. Yeah, so even more far away than in our design, for example. That I suppose played a huge role in what happened then. And they were, at the end, they were trying to occupy Sophia Cathedral in Kiev and to use it for their own needs. They gathered together. The plan was even to commit a suicide altogether, 600 or more people. just because they were sure that the end of the world approaches and it comes in November. Luckily, police stopped the process. They had to implement force to do it. The people were really strong in their intentions. And after that, they received some sentences. They were sentences for a few years, 4 to 6, three of them,
Mm.
three main members of this cult. And they disappeared for a few years. And after that, she's now back with another name. They both founders of this cult had to change their identities and names just because they were enormously popular and well known to everyone, I suppose, in post-Soviet space. Just because there was the biggest, I suppose, as I see it, cult at that times. Later, another cult cult leaders appeared.
Mm.
But now she lives in Moscow actually, and she has another name, and she approaches everything now more from the creative side. So I would say she found her way. She looks a bit different now, but still, so also a lot of esotericism, esoteric stuff, but from creative perspective. Let's switch
Mm.
to another slide.
I
And
just wanted to point out that she's got a total open throat and also
Mhm,
an undefined G, but that total open throat is interesting
mhm.
from how she attracted attention. Okay.
Yeah, of course. But I suppose a huge part of this attracting attention and everything comes from Yuri, the person, Yuri Krivanogov, uh, who met her. So after this dramatic situation with abortion and everything that happened to her, and he had a scientific education. He had a doctor degree in electrotechnic or something like that. Uh, and he was in Donetsk 1 month later, and he met her, and he saw
Mhm.
her, and immediately, I suppose, the channel of awakening played. So I suppose he had some kind of mystical approach to life or some mystical views. But when he met her, he suddenly recognized her as a newborn Maria Devi Christos, and so on. And I suppose a huge part of development of this movement and everything that happens really was like financed by his energy and effort. You see the design
Mhm.
of this person. He's a leader from nature, and he is strong enough and integrate. He's not a triple split as we see. Also, I figure the time I've chosen corresponds, to my opinion, in the best way. But and he's 6'2", also he's a role model with a cross of dedication. Yeah.
Oh
So
yeah.
yeah, you see, it's kind of nice combination. They two meet each other, and she was the front face of this cult because of her appealing attractivity and all this energy that flowed in here. But he was behind the scenes, and his belief and his dedication, I suppose, played a huge role in development of this situation and this cult and this channel of awakening. I'm almost sure that my mother has it. I do not know the birth time, and she doesn't know, and it's impossible. Most likely, it is impossible to figure it out. But this situation, when the person changes in a moment completely and changes the life direction and everything, so that's what happened to him.
Which
So
is the
that
channel of
happened.
awakening? Can you tell me which one it is
So
again?
this 1020. Yeah,
1020. Yes. Okay.
yeah,
Oh,
yeah, yeah.
interesting.
Yeah.
And
So,
did
mhm.
they created a link in their ID G Center? Did she have the 7? Yep. Okay. So and then she had the 51. So she created an
Yeah.
identity with him, even though he had his
Mhm.
own G Center. Yeah,
Yeah,
that
they were
makes
married.
sense.
They were married. They were a couple. Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, the Will Center and the ID and yeah,
Hmm.
that's interesting. Cool.
Hmm. So that was and he now, as I understood, he lives now in Ukraine. By the way, so she left for Moscow, even though the main stage was Ukraine at the moment, Soviet Union, and then already independent Ukraine. 1992, I suppose, yeah, if I'm correct. And now he lives in Ukraine, in Chernihiv region, and she lives in Moscow. And they
Mm,
do not communicate with each other, change their names, everything
mm.
changed. Mm.
Interesting. Interesting. All right. So that was fun. We could probably look at many, many charts, and
Mhm.
we need to move on to our judgments because we're running long. Hopefully, you could stick with us. And yeah, so this week, for me, for my judgments, I wanted to focus on something that recently happened to me since our last meeting, which was I got called in for jury duty, and the jury duty, which was right before the eclipse. So I was like, oh great, I'm going to be, I wonder what's going to happen to this jury duty. I hadn't been called into jury duty, I guess because I moved so much. There was once in New York City when I was called in, but it was Valentine's Day and they canceled it. So this was the first time that I went on a panel to be chosen. But right when I walked in, I knew right away that it was going to be hard for me because they talked about this person was accused of domestic violence with gun. He had a gun altercation. And as I learned a little bit more about the situation, I was able to go, okay, well, maybe there's something here that I can be a part of. But I had such a visceral response to the speaking of guns and domestic violence because I have in the US, the gun problem is so huge. And I'm not specifically against people owning guns, but I think it's gotten far out of control and there needs to be some rules around, who can own guns and what types of guns they can own. And so I knew that I had a strong principles around that. And I was just listening to this jury questionnaire. They were asking all of these juries questions. And all of these people it seemed like they were just trying to acquiesce or trying to, I guess in my mind, present themselves as the perfect, civil person, perfect jury person that was going to be impartial. But for me, I know that there's no impartiality in life. And so they were asking them questions to try to get into whether they're going to have some partiality. And my approach was like, I want them to know that I have strong feelings. I came from a violent, not gun background, but my family was, had a lot of anger problems and fighting problems. God forbid if we had access to guns. And as I heard about this altercation, it was somebody I think had maybe their son had mental illness, and there was a point where the police caught, I think, I didn't hear the story, but that's what I got from the questions, was that the police were trying to, because they caught him with a gun, maybe in making threatening just having some threats against this person who had mental illness. The person themselves weren't charging, weren't prosecuting. It was the police. And so I probably could have been objective about the rules, but I wanted them to know my biases and how I definitely felt that guns were a problem, especially when you have situations like this. Anybody could get killed very easily, and we see this every day with confrontations and anger and emotional issues. And I thought it was very interesting because I thought more people had a broader view about gun ownerships, but all of them said, no, I think people should have guns. Like there was no hesitation with anything about guns. It was like, nope, I think that they should have guns. And I'm just like, in my mind, I'm like, how can you think? I mean, how does a rational person not see that there's an issue that needs to be solved here with the amount of gun deaths? But I thought it was interesting that the topic came up and the internal struggle came up because I have my Mars square, the eclipse, and you do too, but it was in my third house, which was around, community, being vocal about my struggles. And so I thought that it was interesting how that showed up in my chart. And eclipses can show up in a very surprising ways. And I thought that was an interesting demonstration. But yeah, that's my judgment for today, is just really the incredulity that I have of people just not really wanting to face this real problem that we have in the United States of gun ownership.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Understanding you completely. It's almost impossible. I had only one friend who had gun. He ended his life in a prison. He died.
Mm.
So, like, it's really difficult to understand why people need so much guns, but it's a completely different culture here in Europe. And in I don't want to talk about Russia for the moment. In Europe, it is a bit goes a bit another way.
How did he have his gun in the prison?
No, but so he is generally was the one with the gun. Yeah, he was this. Yeah, so from nature, from his nature. Mostly all my friends were intellectuals, more or less. He was also smart, but his background was criminal. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
finally, so his life led him to death. But I'm not. I cannot apply my judgment. He has been from Russia and living here now in Europe, but I do understand. And this is also, we are getting back to this situation with principles. You have your principles. You have to and you vocalized them. Yeah. So
Yeah.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's great.
I
That's
can't
great that
not.
you did it. Yeah. Yeah. You cannot close your mouth in that situation.
Well, I mean, it's a lie. Like, I just feel like people lie to themselves about their biases. They don't understand them. I think it's better to be conscious of them. And I think I for me, it was better that the lawyers knew that I was having this internal struggle, that I might bring in impartiality. I'm very objective, and I can apply that objectivity. But at the same time, if you don't understand your biases, I think it's more dangerous to be in a jury. So maybe I would have been the perfect jury member, because at least I'm honest about my biases. But
and
that was
you try to figure them out. Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's not how the world works for the moment.
No.
Even though Mr. Kahneman wrote a wonderful book about all the biases we can have in our brains, in our minds, and but it still doesn't help in everyday life. And now I'm going to my judgment is again positive, and I'd love to talk about Foundation series that I was so happy to watch during this time of meeting the spring here in Berlin. And I'm really impressed with the quality it is made. Why didn't I hear before? It's like you cannot even compare it with the Dune, this first and second, which I found a really nice sci-fi movie. And Denis Villeneuve is an amazing director. But here in Foundation, I think the idea is deeper. Isaac Asimov, I suppose. So I pronounce it his name the way it could have been done in Russia. Yeah, because as I now know, he was born in Smolensk region and was brought to USA when he was 3 years old. Yeah, and Asimov is actually the winter crop. Yeah, azimaya, we say it. And in Russian, there is a word, azimaya, the crop that is planted in autumn to be as free as possible in spring to receive the first half, to make harvest as early as possible to receive it. So Asimov comes from azimaya. And it's so funny when I found even this, I was even more surprised. And this fictional science, psychohistory, which combines mathematics, sociology, psychology, and knowledge of human history. It reminds me a bit of human design, for example. So this mathematician was able to make predictions how the situation in the world, in the universe, in the empire would develop using this psychohistory, this fictional science. Yeah. So it's really amazing. 2 seasons until now, and they are filming the third one, and all the Actors are amazing job. And by the way, the main producer is the daughter of Isaac Asimov. I
Oh,
suppose
cool.
it also makes it like more true. I don't know how to explain. It is like
It's a book.
it
He
is
wrote a book. It's based on a
yeah,
book.
he
Yeah.
he wrote a book. Yeah, so yeah, the book was famous, by the way, during
Did you read it?
60s, 70s. It was a must read. No, I just
Okay.
know that he's a huge person. I read
Yeah.
some small stuff when I was younger, but he is one of fathers of sci-fi. And I read it also today that this book was a must read for a lot of intellectuals during
Hmm.
60s and 70s, and there are songs that dedicated to some personas from this film. So, like, I can only recommend. It's like
It's funny.
truly interesting thing to
It's
watch.
funny because I just not too long ago, maybe within the last month or two, I spotted his biography on a walk. They have these little book libraries in my neighborhood, and I was like, "Oh, this is interesting." And I actually have never read anything by him, but he's a recognizable name.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, I would love to watch this movie now that you've described it. It sounds very fascinating. But what I think is funny about this, because we talked about this earlier about the nuances of our design, and as we kind of have different approaches as we're preparing these presentations for
Mhm.
you, and we were talking about how I've had a hard time understanding motivations, and you've got the fear motivation and I've got the hope motivation, and it's for me, I'm deepening my understanding of the nuances of our design based on the motivation, because from what I understand, motivation is not supposed to be like an internally kind of identified motivation, but it's more about how people pull things from you, like how you what would you describe it, the exit
Mhm.
frequency, Ra says. So it's more like,
Mhm.
what do you draw out of people? And this is another demonstration about that, because
Mhm.
you're coming from, well, for whatever reason, maybe this is just natural for you, but here I am, like focusing on, when you're a fear motivation, and I have a lot of one lines. My husband is also fear motivation, and so I'm understanding kind of a little bit about how that works with me, and how I have in this process kind of focused on some of the, and I think it's just my frame of mind right now that I'm struggling with certain things in my purview. But I find it interesting that I've been focusing on more of the judgments of the negative fear, maybe fear based, you would say, and you are like more of like focusing on the positives and more of the hope. So it's almost like we pull
Maybe we
these
are
things out
mirroring
of
each
each
other.
other. We pull these things,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
that's how motivations work, and so
Mhm.
I find myself like naturally planning and having to go through all of these things, and you come at the last, not the last minute, but it's like that genius of you is shows with the two line. The genius of you just kind of comes and just like kind of produces it and is able to talk about it, and me, I have to like plan everything and have all of these charts and stuff. So it's very interesting to see how we work together, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. I'm enjoying every moment. Thank you for everything.
Me too. Me too. So yeah, so I guess that's it. Do you want to say anything before we say goodbye?
I want to thank you, all the people who survived till the end of our wonderful podcast, and I hope that you will come back and download and share and find some, and maybe provide us with some future interesting topics. We have a list of ideas, of course, but if you have some questions you'd like to offer, or some themes that are interesting, don't hesitate to inform us about it in comments or
Yeah.
wherever you find
And
it suitable for you.
And we are also inviting other heretics. You don't have to be a heretic profile per se, but you have to be heretic in action, I guess. Other heretics to come on to this show. We have a guest next week, like I said, but I did add, and I will add another link below that's a sign up form. And we do ask you to to enter your birth details so that we can look at it and see what topics we want to present as we're inviting guests. And our next guest is very exciting because it's about kind of the individual creativity that we wanted to explore. And she's got a design that and design and life that kind of presents that. And so we hope that you tune into our next episode with our first guest.
Yeah. It would be nice. It would be extremely interesting for us both, but I hope for everybody who would listen to our next episode.
Yeah, most definitely. All right. Have a great weekend, everybody. And I'll talk to you soon, Tatiana.
Yeah.
Okay.
Same time.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.